Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new one wherein in this podcast we have invited Debo, founder of DevZero. We've tried to answer a lot of questions around how to build a technology startup, what is a dev tool company, how infrastructure or DevOps world is changing. If you are a DevOps engineer, you should definitely watch this video. If you're someone who is planning or in the inception stage of starting a technology company, we have discussed all of these questions around how to build a company, how to raise funds, how to talk to investors, how to build a team, and how to take exits as well. Please watch the video till the end. It's just a 30-minute session. I hope you like the session. I'll see you in the podcast. Right. Welcome to a brand new one, folks. We've got Debo, founder of DevZero, who's agreed to come onto our first session, talk about. So, what is this session going to be about? It's going to be a 30-minute quick session wherein we're going to be talking about founder's journey, Debo's journey, what it takes to build a startup, what are the challenges, and this would be kind of a cookbook or a recipe, some kind of a recipe for budding founders or somebody who's already started figuring out things at the bottom, so that you don't have to figure out things on your own and you learn from Devos or similar founders' mistake and kind of ride onto that journey. All right, Debo, welcome to the session. Thank you for saying yes to us. We'll get started and we'll try to keep it interesting for all our users. So the first question I think we'll get started with: who is Debo? We'll avoid any boring answers about your credentials. We'll talk about what led to DevZero, who was Debo before DevZero, and what are the series of events which has led to again DevZero, and if you had any startups before, if you have something of similar sort before. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, firstly, thank you so much for having me today, Shantanu. As you mentioned, my name is Debo. I currently work as the CEO and the co-founder of DevZero. And we are building a development environment platform at its core. But who am I? So I'm an infrastructure engineer by training and by experience. So I grew up in Calcutta in India, and then have been living in Seattle for the last 14 years. Prior to this company, I used to work at Uber, did a bunch of infrastructure there, which ultimately led to this company getting started just based on a lot of things that we had to do inside the company. We realized that a company like Uber fundamentally has access to a lot of resources, very similar to the Facebooks and the Googles of the world. Facebook is now Meta. And we also realize that a lot of other companies in the world simply don't have access to that amount of capital, that amount of engineers to be able to roll out a lot of these things for their end customers, which is the internal engineering teams. And as a result, those teams are perhaps not operating at the optimal levels of efficiency that they could otherwise be at. And that's from a very high level. That's the premise with which we started DevZero. We built a lot of these things internally at Uber. We saw that developers over time, they actually started to fall in love with it. And we could also see a variety of developer productivity stuff that we would track internally, productivity metrics. Those were also starting to improve across the engineering team. And it continued to improve even as the team grew in size. So yeah, that's how we got started with this company.
So it was majorly working at Uber, figuring out how to improve developer productivity, and that has led to the foundation journey. And how did you kind of figure out co-founder and initial engineering team? Were you doing it alone initially, or you already had a team? Were you doing it parallelly? Could you talk us a little about that as well?
Yeah, so we've been thinking about starting to work on DevZero, this project, for a while, for over a year. We've been talking about it, talking to a lot of people, like different engineering leaders in different companies, to actually verify if some of the things that we were doing internally at Uber, how some of those same like most engineering teams have a similar set of problems. but how are those teams going and trying to solve those problems? So we did a lot of that. And then Rob, who's my co-founder, Rob Fletcher, he and I have known each other since I think 2016. So it only made sense to do a company with him, and that's how it got started. We had nothing. We talked to a couple of investors, found one that we really, really enjoyed working with. Actually, a few that we really enjoyed working with, and that's how the company got started. That was it. All we had was a little MVP to just like prove some things out to us, and a lot has changed. Like none of that stuff. Well, most of that stuff hasn't held true over the last couple of years, but we try to iterate as fast as possible.
So it was 1 year before you actually went kind of live. You and Rob were figuring out things, talking to different people. Did you do all the
Actually, close
POC
to a
and the
couple of years.
okay?
Close to a couple of years, like 1 year before the company started, and we only went really like DevZero is available for public consumption and has been for a few months now. So it's been 3 years since we first started talking about it to it actually being in the hands of people. Because again, it's a pretty deep infrastructure product, and ultimately, while we all enjoy the theme of moving fast and breaking things, with infra things, if you're, let's say, someone is running your company's production infrastructure that you're serving your end users off of, if things fail over there, it's not good for anyone. And so we try to be a little careful, and we try to like solve the hard things first, which sometimes ends up taking a little bit more time.
Help me out understanding one thing, Debo, that it is being said that your ideas generally get stale if you don't implement it real quick. Were you thinking the same? That you mentioned that it took you a couple of years, maybe talking about, but during that phase, did something change? Because 2017, 18, when AI was maybe not there full stream, but things were changing, platform engineering, SRE stuff. So was there the case with you folks as well?
So yeah, from a core urgency perspective, that is something that's always there and will continue to be there. I always think we never move fast enough, and we could always be moving 2 or 3x as fast as we currently do. But ultimately, a few of the lessons over the last couple of years have been like if we take a step back, we started DevZero. Our overall mission is to increase the amount of software in the world. And today we are trying to achieve that by helping software engineering teams build, test, and deploy software faster and easier. And on this journey, we learned pretty early on that different engineering teams operate slightly differently. And having a general platform that can go and serve arbitrary engineering teams and continue to serve them well and continue to not go and burn through their cloud costs or our cloud costs, it's not the easiest thing in the world. And a lot of the fundamental or foundational ergonomics things that we really believe in at DevZero, and we can dive into some of the core technological components as well. A lot of that just wasn't there and has started to actually gain some sort of mainstream adoption over the last year or 2 years. So, yeah, it's been a fun learning journey so far.
So, cool. Thanks for the introduction. I think it was a quite a heavy one. But who would Debo be today if he was not the founder of DevZero?
I'd definitely be selling something somewhere. It could be food or something related to tech, I guess, because that's the only thing I'm not terrible at. Um, so yeah, it would be one of those things. Or I could be working as a chef somewhere. I don't know.
So something around selling, something around.
Yeah, because I genuinely like working with people and users and hopefully trying to be of service to them and helping some of their problems go away. So
Have you
that's
built
what
something
motivates me.
before DevZero, or this is your first stab at
Yeah.
starting something?
Yeah, so we've done a couple of companies before this. And both of them, like, they ended up getting some sort of exits through and through, but it was never at the scale of a DevZero, both in terms of the amount of capital that's been introduced into the company or the size of the team, etc.
And do you think that uh, without those lessons or exits, uh, would you build DevZero the same way if you were doing it for the first time?
Yeah, I think Defin, I don't know actually, Shantanu. Now that I think about it, on the go-to-market side specifically, I knew we had to put a lot of emphasis and focus on that side of the house. But even early on, I think early on we were okay, and then we put little less of a focus in the DevZero journey on the go-to-market side, put a lot of focus on the core product. And now we are starting to think very deeply about go-to-market again. If I was, for example, if I was trying to start DevZero today, obviously a lot of those um, lessons wouldn't have to get relearned, and I would again focus on go to market first and as the only thing.
All right. I think yeah, that makes sense. So we've divided the session into four different sections. The first one was more of an intro, get to know about you. So a lot of our viewers the age of 22 to 27. So these are young engineers trying to learn infrastructure. So and plus we would like you to tell what DevZero is in a very simple term, probably trying to focus on both uh, for both personas where people are just getting started with infrastructure engineering and personas where people like engineering manager or VP level personas where they are taking decisions. So if you want, you can break that answers into two pieces, but definitely this is what something we would definitely interested to know about DevZero. Yeah.
Actually, I just look at it in a very simple way. Right? As engineers, we all join companies or organizations to do good work and to ultimately serve the end users of those companies. So, how can we enable those people to do the best work that they can? Like, that's the number one goal of any company. And usually, it's the platform or the infrastructure engineering teams that are responsible for number one, creating an uh, essentially a set of processes around enabling those people to build, test, and like operate their software in a more reasonable way. And the second component is how can we enable them to run their software in as easy of a way as possible, so that they can, like, these are the people that are building the software. They know their users the best, so how can they iterate with their users the fastest? So that's the number one premise. As a platform engineer, the job is to, in my opinion, and take all of my opinions with a brick of salt. But ultimately, our job is to enable our product engineering teams. That's it. It's to never become a bottleneck or someone that you have to, or an obstacle that you have to jump over. Like, that's a failure in my mind for any platform engineering team. You need to be building products, and your end customers are your internal product engineers. And the VP of engineering at that point in time, the job is to put the best team together, the right people working on the right set of things, and to make sure all obstacles are essentially removed. As a result, that role starts to think about, because it's fundamentally a more operational role, you start to think about more things like developer productivity, infrastructure costs, etc., and how can we keep those things within control as much as possible. So now to tie it back to DevZero, our view of the world is that today as an end engineer, sure, I can write some code on my computer. I can show it to my colleagues, whoever is sitting around me. I can get on a Zoom call, show them the whatever applications, products I'm building, I can show it to them. But after that, when I need to start either as a proper MVP or start serving my customers, I can't really serve that traffic from my local computer. Like, sure, I'm sure some people could figure that out, but um, that's usually not how it's done. And at that point in time, there's a large drift between how stuff is done on your computer and how stuff is done in production. And in the middle, there's been this container-y thing that has come up over the last 10 odd years. It's around essentially standardizing the release processes and just standardizing the environment in which things are built and in which things are run ultimately. And so with DevZero, we try to bridge the gap between production and development. Our sentiment is very simple. Most companies or most software engineering teams, the ones we serve today, they already have some sort of configuration, often called infrastructure as code. Some things exist, be it a bunch of Docker files, Helm charts, scaffold YAMLs, etc., or even CloudFormation templates. So why can't an end engineer just get an environment exactly like that? Why can't an end engineer code in production? And normally you don't write code in production because you'll break end user traffic. But what if we could? What if we can get very close to that sort of a world? And that's what we are trying to make happen with DevZero.
Is that something of its own, or there are similar tool exist before DevZero?
Stuff like this has existed forever in some way, shape, or form. Even if you look at it in the late 1990s, when even before the PayPal, it's at X.com days, when even and Elon Musk, if you listen to a lot of the interviews, it's like, yeah, I used to sleep during the day and I used to code at night when users weren't using our servers because that was the only computer we had. And in the modern world, how that has manifested itself is a lot of like VMs, etc., getting created. In the cloud world, a lot of teams give every engineer their own developer accounts. So it can be done. And there's a lot of tools out there, be it using Docker in a variety of ways to try very hard to make a Mac laptop look and feel like that Linux system in production. But you only get so far. And the challenges are your local computer will always lack certain set of resources. You can't really get the whole of AWS to run on your local, even the parts of AWS that you care about. And even the alternative is give everyone an account, and then every engineer starts to use AWS. And I don't know how much, I'm actually pretty sure you've probably heard this as well. Like, engineers always enjoy creating resources because I need something and I need it right now, but then I never remember to turn anything off. And no one knows how to turn it off, who's using what, etc. in that world. And it becomes an operational nightmare at the end of the day. So yes, there have been a lot of solutions. There are different ways to skin this cat. But I am partial in believing that our approach is the best.
Let's take a situational question wherein, I mean, I'm always infrastructure biased because that's what I've done throughout my life. Let's suppose I am a DevOps or an infrastructure engineer, wherein I'm responsible for writing Terraform, Pulumi, and spinning things up on AWS or for that matter, any public cloud. Take care of a bunch of other things like continuous integration, delivery using GitHub, Azure DevOps, and then bit of FinOps as well at the end, wherein I'm shutting down things manually or running some sort of run books at the end of the day. In the entire ecosystem, where does DevZero fits in? Like, if I were to take infrastructure engineer prospect, if I were to go and convince my engineering manager that, okay, this is where I need to use DevZero in the entire ecosystem, where that would be.
I normally start again with the end product engineers that they serve and give them a production symmetric environment where they can start to write their software. Reuse everything that you do in production, but let every engineer essentially go and create their own instance of production. And then work inside of your DevZero configurations to have software actually go and understand when things are being used, when things aren't being used, to handle all of the various types of scaling, etc. For context, I was actually reading this report from Datadog recently, and it essentially said that 80% of all container workloads that are running on the hyperscaler clouds today are all completely underutilized. So there's a lot of waste that happens, and ultimately, sure, as a DevOps engineer, you might be running a little bit of Terraform or whatever else, because all of it is ultimately an interface to call the cloud APIs, and you go and spin up a lot of resources. And then very rarely do we immediately after ask the question, like, are all of these resources really needed? And this foundation, it's foundationally the problem of a DevOps or a platform team being given a thing and then they run it, versus the people that wrote the software give them the relevant tools so that they can go and operate the software themselves because they have most of the context. Does your arbitrary internal test app really require 100 replicas? I don't know. Maybe it does. But that team is the one that understands that the best, not the person who's going and applying the Terraform. And so that is the barrier that we are trying to get rid of.
Does it kind of change the way infrastructure engineers are being hired? I mean, does that kind of reduces a lot of those workloads? Do you think around
In
that
an
as well?
ideal world, yes. In an ideal world, yes, because software can help do a lot of those tasks easier. And then those people can then get focused on serving the actual customers of whatever projects or companies that they're working at. Because usually managing infrastructure, etc., that is not a company's superpower. Most companies don't sell their infra. So,
Because that's not okay. Yeah, that does generate money, but that's more around backend stuff and
mhm.
I mean, yeah. All right. Cool. I think then you spoke multiple times, kind of productionizing your, I mean, different workspaces or doing the same set of things which you would do in a production environment. Like, how does integration of DevZero looks like with the cloud platforms like AWS, Azure? Do you kind of sit on top of it, or do you have a different layer? Talk us a little more about it. Do you, or it both kind of exist? Either, let's suppose companies are using, a team is using AWS, they can have DevZero on top of it, or if you're just starting up a small set of MVP or a new project in a company, you can straight away get started with DZ without even including any public cloud. So how does that work?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a fork in the journey. So there are some teams, imagine a team is already using some hyperscaler cloud thing. Let's take the AWS example. You might already have a certain amount of configuration. You might be using something like, I don't know, an EKS. And as part of EKS, you might have a lot of Helm charts, etc. So at whatever that packaging layer is, we try to integrate over there. Whatever Helm charts you have, you just run all of that directly on DevZero. It should all just work out of the box. If you have a certain number of IAM roles that are needed by arbitrary nodes to do arbitrary things, you should be able to give DevZero workloads those credentials as well, or those IAM configurations. So for a team that's already using stuff, whatever that might be, everything should work in a DevZero world just as it did before. For a new team that's just starting up on whatever project, you can just start build. You can and should start building directly on DevZero, because in that world you don't have to really think about very much of the terraforming things, etc., etc. underneath. You don't have to think about your allocations, etc. anymore either. We just take care of it all underneath based off of how your software is performing.
So in order to, I mean, just summarizing it for our users, so there are two ways of using it. One is you already have some sort of configuration, infrastructure as a code or nchar, whatever it is. You can start deploying using leverage the same and start deploying on DevZero. And then the second is when you're just starting up new, all you care about is you building your application, could be Node, could be anything. And then DevZero kind of takes care of the entire deployment process. But how do you folks do it? Is there your own proprietorship language, or how do you? I mean, what do I need to do in order to get my first, let's suppose, Python app running on DevZero?
Yeah. So to your last point, Shantanu, so a couple of components are sure. If you might have a Helm chart, like all you need to get started on DevZero is some repository, something that you want to bring, or you can just start from a plain empty scratchpad. We have a somewhat proprietary YAML language, YAML-based language, wherein you just define how you want a workspace to be, what things you want inside of a workspace. It could be a bunch of different binaries, different environment variables, packages, source code, whatever you might need. And you can also tell within this recipe YAML how you want your environments to get set up. Like when your workspace is what we call it, when the workspace is coming up, I might want to deploy 10, 15, 20, 30 different microservices within some ephemeral Kubernetes clusters. And so you just write that in a few lines, call your Helm charts, do a Helm apply or whatever else, and it just works.
And going to take care of the underlying infrastructure like I was
Nope,
doing before.
nope.
All right. And I'm not writing any new configuration as well. I'm just using
Nope.
the recipes which you've already defined.
Yeah, because we try to get a little closer to the application layer over here. Like things like Helm are essentially an interface um, for telling infrastructure APIs how they should go and run a packaged application. So that's the bit that we focus on. If there's an existing Docker image, whatever existing artifacts exist, we just take and run that. If you already have those, unless if you don't, then just build it on them.
As an infrastructure, that sounds a bit scary. They will take like from a year from now, we're not building a lot of those Kubernetes cluster, not writing any Terraform anymore, not taking care of the state management. Looks like DevZero over here taking a lot of those heavy lifting and doing it by yourself and eliminating, I'm not sure eliminating, but optimizing the level of infrastructure as a code or configuration you would have to do. Is that true? Does
Mhm.
people aspiring DevOps engineer need to think around this angle that technologies like this will optimize a lot and then can have a lot of adverse effect as well?
Pretty, I won't think of it as an adverse effect per se, Shantanu, but if you look at the trend over the last 6, 7 years, like there has been a general grav people seem to be gravitating towards more serverless type things. And the first implementation of serverless, the one we are all most familiar with, is Amazon's Lambda. And ultimately, that's just a way of writing an application using their complete SDKs and frameworks in which they figure out all of the runtimes, and your application is just alive when it needs to be. And then after that, of course, we have had things. I'll just take the Amazon examples over here. Amazon has a thing called ECS, Elastic Container Service, which you give it a container with a little bit of specs around it, and they go and run it for you. And you can give it a bunch of EC2 machines on which those things get run. And then Amazon goes and invests in something like a Fargate, which is like a more serverless runtime. Does it work for everything across the Amazon stack today? Not yet, but I'm sure they'll get there. And that's the world we fundamentally believe in. Like, why getting to a more serverless future fundamentally helps all of us in just optimizing our utilizations, because most workloads out there, most Kubernetes clusters for a given company, they aren't running that hot all 24 hours of a day. So why are they up, and why are we spending money on it and burning electricity at the same time?
Cool. All right. So I think with that, I think we've spoken a lot about tech and how does overall architecture looks like in the background. How about Devo, now we switch on to a bit of team section wherein I think the first question is that how do you think about shipping new feature? Uh, is that purely based on users' feedback, your customers' feedback, or you do your internal research? Because one of the things with startup is that you kind of get into that hole of building new features every week, shipping that, and thinking that's going to yield you a lot of signups. So how do you kind of look at that aspect?
So it's a combination of things. We've been fortunate to have worked in a few of these companies that have built a lot of this type of stuff internally, and we have a sentiment of what worked and what didn't work, and at what stage what things worked. So that leads into a lot of the things we built. I'd actually say that's the first one. The second one is based on a select set of user and customer feedback, like what's working there, what's still missing, what would help you be more successful on DevZero. And those things usually fall more in the administrative and the ops side of the house on how we can get better visualization, how can we get better APIs or visibility across everything my team is doing, etc. And like those are the two main drivers of for what we do primarily. Yeah.
On the next one around hiring, how do you approach hiring when I mean now kind of getting expensive day and day where a lot of biggies like Google, Facebook would always try to offer more lucrative packages. How do you kind of having those how do you kind of end up hiring people which you want to have in your team, or you kind of go vice versa where you kind of bet on freshers, junior level engineers who are more passionate about technology compared to the first one?
So this is one of the things we had to learn and unlearn a little bit. Like both Rob and I spent a long time at Uber, and the company changed a lot during our time there. And a lot of the things that worked at that stage of Uber doesn't work in an early stage company, fundamentally. I think the question is a little deeper. It's not just about like the engineer that works at a Meta or a Google. It's more about why they work and whether they truly enjoy the hard work. Because it's less about the 40 hours or an 80 hours a week that you put in. It's about enjoying the fact that you get to work on an incredibly hard problem. And that matters if for some people that matters more than the money, etc. side of the house. And then of course you take a bet on a longer term view of the company as well. So that's what we focus on.
Kind of selling your proposition, long-term
Yeah.
goals.
And the other thing is we build a tool for engineers, so on that side of the house it's somewhat easier as well.
Is it fair? Is it really easy, or it's generally gets like, sometimes gets difficult to hire good
No, I think
engineers?
engineers usually get what we do, so that part is, yeah, simple.
Sure. Cool. I think on the team size, that helps. I think on the team size, what's your general go-to-market strategies? How do you make sure that whatever cool feature you're building gets to the right set of audience and gets amplified where it should be?
Been working on a few things in that area, especially now that we have started to go public over the last 2, 3, 4 odd months. Ultimately, there are bits of DevZero that are for like the staff principal engineer at a company, the one that's trying to drive more standardization across their teams. And there's some things for the director of engineering slash VP of engineering personas that are trying to drive more team level efficiencies. So we'll normally communicate with them across a variety of channels, and we try to highlight some of our value propositions, some of the ways in which our other customers use us to them. And that's been our strategy so far. And of course, whoever wants to just come and sign up and start using DevZero, tinkering and figuring things out, they're more than welcome to.
I think that brings us to our last section, which is more around investment, because it's in the news, right? You folks have a fair bit of funding. So how do you approach that? You mentioned at the beginning that you spent a couple of years around ideation and evangelization of the product. So how does all for our new founders or just people who are just getting started, how does it work? Do you reach out to investors first? When do you reach out? Do you build some sort of POC, or it's more around inbound traffic you have from investors because you already have a credential working at Uber and all of those? So how does that entire ecosystem works?
So the past experiences, that part definitely helps. And then over time, you also build up a little network of, because investors are also constantly talking to various engineering leaders and companies to understand their challenges so they know what areas to invest in next. So after a point in time of working in a company, etc., you just get more connected to that community. And in our case, we have primarily been working with folks that have been doing engineer facing infrastructure B2B SaaS software. And that fits our bucket really well. So that's how all of our fundraising things have worked out so far.
All right. So I think the last question of the session, when if you were to build DevZero today, what would you do different, taking the learnings from your past experiences, exits, working at Uber, and all of that?
This is the hard question. Probably make it even simpler to use and just focus on more go-to-market things directly within the product on how to essentially make it easier to get more adoption in DevZero. That's the main thing I'd focus on.
Cool. With that, it wraps up the first session of meeting founders at and talking at length. Thank you, Debo, for taking out the time and talking to us, answering to these questions. I know some of them might not be easy, but thank you. At least this will help a lot of budding founders how to think about technology, how to think about team sizing, how to think about fundraising. And yeah, that with that, I would like to thank you again, and hopefully we will speak soon again with something interesting.
So thank you so much for having me, Shantanu.
All right, folks. Bye bye. Take care.
All right. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you loved the podcast. If you want to see more of these, if you want me to invite more of these founders of DevTool companies, or for that matter, any SaaS companies of your choice, please let us know. We'll be happy to request them, have them invited onto our show and answer more of these entrepreneurship or technological questions. Thank you for watching the video till the end.